I'm gonna be replaced by Quinn because she's doing such a good job. No one needs me anymore.
Oh my god. Oh no. I don't know. Do you think Quinn would want to just take on full DM responsibilities in perpetuity? I don't know.
Not in perpetuity, maybe. I don't know if we should talk about it on air, but she has a million ideas for a million things, so I might be replaced partially. It's it's gonna be slow. I'm gonna be turned into a Borg.
Well, I mean, like, listen, it's been a good run, almost a decade, but
Yep. You can't let anybody touch your crown. This is what happened in season 1. We had a different DM. Season 2, here I come, and I never gave it back. I should have learned.
Oh boy. Well, yeah, but another month, another crew gunk it is now.
Yes, it's very easy to remember because of the Pokemon Crow Gunk. That's how I remember it.
That's a good mnemonic device for sure. Yeah.
So we just finished the second dry arc. That's what the audience just heard, which went to 4 episodes out of necessity because of how juicy everything got, which you're going to hear in the second wet arc. Then I had to go to 4 episodes. Like I said, I didn't have to go to 4 episodes, but it's easier on a number of different levels if they're the same length. So just for recording purposes, because we do it every Tuesdays and Thursdays. Is this interesting? I don't know if anybody cares about this part, but...
I remember listening to that 3rd episode of this arc after it was done, doing listening to the drink cut there, and it was just like, and the conversation in the chat reminded me of that second arc for Away Team during Resubian with Laura, where it's like, okay, things are feeling good. The tone, the pacing, the dynamics, all that really clicked together. And I think it just got to a point where, because of all the things, the way the roles went so bad for some people and others, that it just necessitated that extra episode to not just close the loops too quickly.
Yeah, the one I think you're referring to is the one where at the end we couldn't make a decision about what to do, and I think the audience heard a pretty heavily edited version of that. We went on for so long, just back and forth about what to do.
That was definitely the case there, and like that's kind of part of the magic of the production, right? Is like you said, we can hum and hum and like forget our rules or forget our character names and stuff like that. And after editing, it's like, oh, we're just geniuses. I mean, I'll get people saying, Skitch, like you're so quick and witted. Like, that's Austin. Austin is what makes me feel like I'm really quick and on top of things when it comes to like strong character moments. The only thing I'm quick at doing is making egregious puns that will one day get my character killed on the spot and erased from the podcast entirely,
You don't have to admit that. There's not like a zone of truth. You can just say you're smart and cool and, no one can stop you.
There's things... I'm sorry. I feel compelled to be honest in some cases here. I don't have any shame about that.
Well, that's good. I think that's the appeal of this show within a show we're doing. We didn't really introduce ourselves. Everyone knows who we are, but just in case, do you want to plug anything? Skitch? Michael Skitch, Skitchiano, the Skitchster, Skitching up? Skitching.
Skitch is just fine. In terms of plugging, honestly, I don't have too much to plug other than like, you can find me on Blue Sky as Skitch. I was able to snatch that name. I think is it Skitch or Skitch? Oh shoot, is it Skitch on Blue Sky?
Let's pull it up.
Damn it, I need to double check to make sure it's actually Skitch on Blue Sky. I think it is. Yes, it is Skitch on Blue Sky. Yes.
Yeah.
I jumped on there early so that I couldn't be sniped by other people on that there. So I'm Skitch on Blue Sky. Easiest place to find me, honestly. Or just on the Dice Funk Discord. I spend more time there than is considered healthy by some. But honestly, there's a certain comfort in there. But beyond that's just, the music I do. And honestly, I like helping out on other productions, including like on Dice Funk, where I sort of give myself the title of like halfway between an associate producer and a production assistant in many ways.
Yeah, I guess to open up this episode where I'm interviewing you, sponsored question by Faith and Valor. Keep up the great content. Lime, and this is for brunch, Austin Tiene El Abuelo. What exactly do you do behind the scenes? I know you've talked about it in bits and pieces over various podcasts and in the Discord, which is linked in every episode. But if you had to sum it up so that it could be clipped and then reposted anytime anyone asks, what would you say you do besides the voice that people hear?
There's 2 primary things. The first one is audio preparation. So taking audio from each episode, doing processing on them to remove noise, mouth clicks, things like that, leveling them off and such so that when they come back to you, you could just focus on editing and not have to deal with denoising them in Audacity and stuff like that. And then the other side of it is the extra effort of designing titles, title sequences, and video assembly for the YouTube channel.
Yeah, so a lot of stuff. You'd think, oh, a podcast is you talking to a microphone and then the show is done. Pretty easy. But there is kind of a goofy amount of work behind the scenes. My legs literally fell asleep earlier from sitting in this chair for so long, just trying to get the timing right on every, trim out how long we had to think about every little stupid thing that happens on the show.
It's one of the advantages you have in an audio-only format. Like when you're doing editing for dialogue and we watch somebody who does like a YouTube video for a video essay, and you see like the jarring jump cuts being done to keep the pacing of the dialogue off. It's a bit more obvious what's going on. But in audio, as long as the cadence and pacing feels natural, those sort of edits are invisible. And that's kind of the goal in this sort of format, is to make it feel like a seamless, well-constructed radio drama, but it being predominantly improvised and everything else.
Yeah, sometimes I don't edit where I probably could to keep it more natural feeling. This is just a stylistic choice. There's not like a right or wrong decision. But sometimes if cutting it closer would undercut the drama, or it's someone has to dramatically declare someone, I will leave in a little bit more of the thinking or something than I would in other situations. That's just a judgment call in the moment,
Yeah. And I think it's also a bit of a difference for me asking you kind of a question there. It's a bit of a transition from when you're doing like podquisition editing to this, because that one is not so dramatic, but it is just like a shifting from a more traditional like talking heads type of podcast into a dramatic podcast sort of editing heuristic.
Oh, yeah. I wonder if our audience knows I used to edit Fish Shark Marketing. Well, that's hard to say.
Right.
Fish Shark Marketing, which is a really funny podcast with Stephanie and Conrad, who have been on the show before. But let's do our next question, kind of segueing back to Boyce, the water genasi, who we're here to talk about. This question is sponsored by. And finally, Joseph Timbrello, Simon Lee, conduit of Chungus, bearer of Dinkus, minion of John Con. How did you arrive at this particular character? Is there a story there?
So it's the way that a lot of my character concepts begin is I honestly, more often than not, look for one, like if other people have other character ideas already, and usually they do, because I tend to be a little later in on the development because I'm kind of slow at making characters. I'll look at like kind of a role within the party I can kind of fill. Not necessarily like from a traditional, like, striker, defender, leader, whatever sort of thing there, but more from the standpoint of like mental stat kind of spread, personality types and otherwise. And when it came down to this, I was sort of split between like artificer or wizard was kind of the angle I was going for. And between the two, wizard kind of stuck out as like the stronger choice to go for. And then from there, it was then just a matter of like having some sort of lead in. So the gimmick was, underwater. I had just been playing a lot of Octopath Traveler. I have this aesthetics of Partitio in my head, but like wild, wet, building a new time. Architect, someone who's building the town. And the term I think I even threw around was aquatect. And so like those are the main things to kind of establish a water genasi wizard, and in order a scribe wizard, because that plays well into like scribes. That's a good parallel to like blueprints and stuff. So all that, was the sort of foundation. As for the character name, I think I've said this before, but it's fun to reiterate. The name was literally just happenstance. I was clicking the random name generator as I was drafting the idea on D&D Beyond, and one of the character names literally was just Boyce with the quotes around it. And that was such an absurd prompt. I'm like, I have to stick with that and just go with that as my name. But those are the foundational elements at play. There's like I come up with like what character class I want to pick up and do a twist on. So, and this has sort of been my whole thing. If people can probably realize ever since season 3, where I have the paladin that's int based, the warforged rogue sorcerer that doesn't really focus on damage spells, Aze being a druid that's not a druid, Treyan being like a monk with his own particular sort of goals, Max being like a different style of Hexblade Warlock. I like trying to come up with flavor and mechanical twists on established class roles and ideas.
Yeah, you never to do just the basic, fighter or human with a sword stuff. So, I mean, I think this show in general tries to subvert so many tropes all the time and take different and fresh approaches that maybe sometimes we do it too much and it's like unrecognizably fantasy. Dan and I have been talking about that a lot. It's like, what if we just try to actually go back to basics and one of us is an angry barbarian and another is a smart wizard? I don't know what our audience would think about us doing that.
I think there's room to make that work, obviously, but the other angle I go for sometimes is like, okay, what character class has not been really shown off for a while? That was the big reason for Aze back in Season 8, was because the last time there was a druid was literally Season 1. And then in this case here, it's like, okay, there was no wizard last season, and there was no wizard in Arabella. Okay, let's just throw a wizard out here, you know?
Yeah, I'm surprised we're still churning and burning through like subclasses. I bet there's more than a couple we haven't done yet, which is surprising after 10 years of different party compositions.
Yeah, and as much homebrewing and tweaking that I do, like the only homebrewed subclasses I actually used that were like from scratch was the one in Season 4, the temporal sorcery, and technically the one I made for Martis at the end, and the pilot subclass I made for Max in Season 10. But other than that, it's all been just like standard options for the most part with some reflavoring for the most part. And I find that to be a bit of a fun challenge to sort of take someone else's design and then figure out how far you can push the aesthetics and flavor of it to make it feel distinct while still retaining that design framework.
Definitely. Let's move to the next question, sponsored by Extellaris. Brent, still every episode of Dice Funk Goatly, and C.A. Little. You often play kind of what's known as the straight man of the group, bouncing off the much bigger, sillier personalities. This season, we have Barbella, the Riddle Paladin, and Reaper, the, basically Shadow the Hedgehog monk. How have you been finding the dynamic? Sometimes it's hard to turn to the camera and say, like, here's what Boyce feels right now, but where are you at with your party members?
I'm always impressed and flattered to be around people who are so clandestinely funny and have so much ease at doing big, strong, dramatic choices, because that's something that I feel like I struggle with a lot of times. But one of my friends, Fornea, she even threw this out at me as I kind of naturally fall into being a sort of a foil of a personality. I end up positioning myself in a way to make other people's traits seem even more strong and apparent. So that's where I think a bit of value can be found in being a straight man type, is that it allows other people's characters' traits to shine a little brighter, even if it does sometimes mean that it's a little harder for me to do something like, hey, here's me doing something wacky or out there, outside of some little chucklefuck puns and stuff like that I'll throw out with varying degrees of success.
This last arc that we've recorded, the audience hasn't heard any of it yet. You have been getting some, development and interesting things going on. So it's more of a slow burn. I know we can't
Right.
say too much about spoilers and whatnot at this point, but yeah, it's definitely like you kind of stand there and try to highlight your party members first. You put on their air mask on the plane before you secure your own, which you're not supposed to do, but it's very selfless.
I will suffocate myself in that case for sure. Yeah. It's also too because I'm someone that sometimes has to kind of sit in the character for a while to really feel like what directions I want to go. I'll have an inkling of an idea of who they are in some respects. Sometimes I can develop a large amount of backstory and that could get me in the mindset. And sometimes I have to kind of be in the character, be in the scenario, feel what the narrative themes are about the season and the other cast members so that I can kind of carve out a more strong narrative branch to go down. And that takes a little bit of time sometimes.
As of this recording, we just learned that Reaper's whole motivation is to bring back her martial arts master so she can kill him, which first of all is fucking incredible. It's the best motivation since I want to find the Mothman.
Good. It's I love it so much.
It's very funny. And we've known since the beginning that Barbella just loves riddles and the riddle church and so forth. Have you been Joe, trying to find like a more easily sum upable thing, like something that just came up in this new arc, is that you all are trying to revive a civil engineer who is a character that I definitely thought kind of formulated someone you could talk about architecture with.
It's funny sometimes, right? You make the character that's kind of like the bookish nerd who wants to like espouse about technical details or philosophy, and sometimes you will have a moment where the character kind of like does the prattling, and it's just, depending on who else they're around, it's like, okay, all they can do is like, okay, nerd, move on. So having someone who can balance off of that is certainly nice. But yeah, I think it will become more clear, like kind of like what Boyce's deal is about what his stakes are and what his aspirations are as I get through this current arc and then the subsequent one afterwards, which I'm really excited about, because my favorite thing about the subsequent arc is that there's basically a borderline throwaway gag that happens that then becomes real later on,
Yeah, we do that a lot. So I think that's a classic Dice Funk thing, is like, oh, you thought that was a throwaway joke. No, Baby Genius is actually the cold fulcrum of my character. Sorry.
Dear God. My thought is, like, I always find it interesting how other people go about their characters and how quickly they can establish like strong personality types and such. And I know I'm throwing questions back at you. I remember the first time I did a thing with Shardpoint and you were a player, people are like, oh, Austin's got to be like the biggest gremlin problem player to be with. And I'm like, absolutely not. Like, you will do like big, kind of obnoxious seeming actions as your character, but I can see how everything kind of either serves to set up a joke or serves to move things forward. And there's a big difference between someone who does like big, wild things and then someone who does that in service of making something interesting for everyone else or for the DM in that case.
I appreciate the compliment. It really does come down to a kind of improv mentality where you don't want to stomp on the scene. You want to add your bit, but then kind of keep the ball in the air for the next person. So yeah, there's a mentality where you'll be like, in order to get my joke, I will spike this into the ground as hard as possible. And that is disruptive. But if your joke keeps it aloft, and you get better with that in time.
I think the other reason why I like playing like the straight man type character on top of that is it kind of presents a bit of grounding to the world around them, because one of the things I kind of relished the most back in season 8 and to some degree like the current season is you'll have these things that seem weird and alien, and then there's just this one character that's just like, yeah, that's normal. And I feel like that adds a bit of like hominess and a bit of casualness to the whole thing, because I wouldn't say I get vexed by, but I get a little frustrated by when you have like a show where there is like a character that's acting as like an audience insert, calling attention to how everything is weird. I'm like, I know it's weird. I'm the one that's feeling like it's weird. It's funnier for me when there's someone in there who's like, oh, there's slime, whatever. Hi there, and just reacted. So like that's sort of where like I feel like it's the added fun of being a straight man type of character. It's like it sort of, I wouldn't say it lampshades, but it sort of adds as an additional foil to the world around it. The fact that they're so used to it and so casual about it makes the absurdity even more absurd. The fact that someone is like, this is normal, this is fine.
Yeah, it's a kind of razor's edge to walk between world building and keeping a loose collaborative feel, because I want people to say like, what if there was a spirit of Halloween here? Like what if, so this building was made out of a giant turtle shell, and then we can just roll with it. But also if everything is 100% infinitely wacky at all times, it does stop feeling like a world, and it's hard to get invested in, and like, oh, you're going to blow up my Laffy Taffy balloon land. Why do I give a shit? So I don't even have a correct answer of like what is the level of like silly wacky improv to taking the setting seriously. I just do my best.
No, absolutely. And I think another way to think about it, back to the improv principles, it's sort of another way of doing a yes and, right? Someone proposes something that seems kind of absurd, and instead of pushing back and thinking that's weird, you're like, oh no, yeah, sure, of course. Yeah, of course, the blippity blop, right? I like to think of my favorite element of that was back in Rezubian. the fact that the throwaway gag about the whole ship being like ice cream focused, and then in the first downtime scene proposing, my character Max and their significant other Cammy are gonna do like a gauntlet run. That's a normal thing where people just try to have all the ice cream flavors in one go. Like, like I said, it's something that is so absurd, but treating it like as a casual thing just people do, I think is very fun. I think that's another fun way of investing in the world when you're like, this is not something I'm separate from, this is something I'm a part of. And that's another rule I like to kind of employ when how I play my characters.
Yeah, I agree big time. Let's move to the next question, sponsored by Christman, finally changing his Patreon name. Concept, champion of the Crab Salute. Man, I really wanted to do some kind of more evil crab villain. We'll get back to that.
No, I'm just hearing. Sorry, I heard like crab salute our troops kind of gag there too. Just.
And also Eardrum Espresso. What do you think about the world building of this season specifically? Because I tried to leave the town of Zolfo very open for you specifically, because I didn't know how many chances you would get to do your thing, architecture. So I'm always like turning to you and being like, "Do you have any thoughts about what this building would be?"
I have something that I plan on having revealed in an upcoming episode about that, actually. I have a plan. I'll probably even confer it with you off air here, but I have like something in my head because of something you said about the world building that I actually wasn't expecting. So basically, there was some assumption I made about what the gig was. Then you said something in a recent episode that changed that because it told me in my head, okay, my assumption was wrong. There's something else about how the gig was formed that is now different, and now I have that as a tool that I wanted to throw an idea your way. So audience, look forward in like 5 or 6 months to figure out what I'm talking about here. But like, I have, and I appreciate that, right? Is that mixture of like taking ideas from us, but then also giving us room to play around. I think the biggest challenge with the world building for Zalfo, and this is something we talked about months in advance of this season, was how do you make an underwater civilization city culture without feeling too derivative between things like Little Mermaid, SpongeBob, or really any other media that takes place underwater? What types of structures are made and otherwise? And the biggest like thread I had as initial idea was the big difference between a lot of those regions and Zalfo's and like, what we're doing here in Banyan is like there's not many natural resources that you conventionally would use to make homes, especially because the biome is predominantly made for plant people who don't need the same domiciles as other types of creatures. And that creates an interesting logistical challenge, especially because there's all these resources. People are rushing out to, claim a hole or whatever else. And just like kind of how the Wild West is, you basically are going on a region that may be a bit arid, that may not, and we may not even have like an infrastructure. We don't have a railway system going in from other regions to haul in supplies underwater to build a city. We have to use what's around us, or we can scavenge and such. And that creates some fun challenges mentally about how do we make this whole thing work, especially as it's inevitable that more people are going to be coming. Like, that is inevitability that my character Boyce is cognizant of and has to kind of like reconcile with. How do I make this city expand, grow, able to absorb more demand as they come in without having the resources I would normally expect in other areas?
If you could go back in time and nudge the season 9 team into creating a biome that's less fucking weird, how much would you change? You mean, please, just can this place have soil, regular soil?
My contribution was the well resurrection, as you remember, and I think you guided me a little bit towards with how that season played out. But my favorite thing about that was the fact that Trajan's idea was to have this resurrection well, and as soon as he realized he didn't need it, he passes out and couldn't tell everyone else, no, don't worry about this anymore. And oops.
Yeah.
He got a little EP, took a nap, and oops, consequences 2 seasons later.
Sure, yeah, it would have been a very different season this time if you had gotten to walk that back. But also, just from the beginning, it feels like one of those, genie wishes, like you shouldn't have that much power. So I think you were already committing to, making that big swing.
it was the idea with that, and we kind of talked about this, was that this was an idea that was not a good one. Tran was not very smart and wasn't thinking about long-term ramifications. All he thought was, I have friends who have better ideas about what to do than I can come up with. I need them back to help them realize their plans for the future. And that was his only recourse. I mean, being killed hundreds of times does something to your brain, I guess,
I mean, in this universe, the space is warped and time is bendable with our various, lore implications. But, I mean, to segue into the next question, sponsored by Level 9 cleric Caroline, hands you a pamphlet about sustainable library arson, marine science guy, and Nephis Decidia, the queer sheep, trying homemade progesterone cream. Love you all. Congratulations. In the arcs that we've done so far, we've begun unspooling, let's call it the morality of the setting. I think Quinn has done obviously such an exciting job with the vibe checks about we're literally passing judgment, like how bad does a person need to be before we bring them back? And it's not even like we can do it in a vacuum because we're playing characters who have specific perspectives. It's so exciting. I guess the bigger question, what do you think about the arc so far? But how would you have voted more specifically on the vibe check so far? That's a good question now that we have a couple under our belt.
Oh man, like that second vibe check arc is really rough, right? Because you have like these two elements at play. And I think the big thing, the kicker, was just like the Hialeah interaction with Slater just really warping the stakes because it's like now you have this added threat over everything else. You have these other elements at play, and it really would come down to kind of how I designed the particular character, because what's really great about the Dry team is that you have these three characters with three different attitudes about resurrection. And then Quinn, who's able to put very strong characters from a moralistic standpoint to make choices about. Like arc one was I believe was Dumas was the person in question and being brought back, correct?
Correct.
And like that one I felt was not necessarily like a softball one, but was one that was not as hard to think about the moralistic implications as much as the second arc was, which is great because it kind of onboards people on what is the mechanics, what are the rules about this. Now let's throw a huge ass wrench into this. Now we got two people co-related in some respects that you have to kind of choose between, and both have odd elements of it when it comes to the nature of death, how they view death, what their views about the worlds are, their temperament, what they would do when they come back, and then honestly just other entities. In terms of how I would vote, gosh, I put myself very much in like the Lillian camp in terms of my thought process, being like, oh God, why are you asking me about this now? Can you two just agree so I don't have to be at fault for this if I choose wrong? And
it seems like the one where there'd be the most out of character disagreement or like dynamism in the discussion would be Pofo, because I feel like at this point everyone's like, Slater seems to be a pretty bad guy, and Dumas did a bad thing but seems mostly well intentioned. The Pofo though, there's so much room for interpretation in that vibe. There's so much of it was just implication, and it's just doesn't give you any of the answers, which is good. I think that's the strength of the storytelling, and it's such a Rorschach test. It's like, what do you see when you look at this?
Right, and I think and Quinn's doing such a great job of like playing into the idea of like, okay, you're basically doing like the Cyclock from Phoenix Wright / the Phantom Thieves mind prison from Persona 5 kind of merged together. And the problem is that even when you're doing this, since you're not getting perfect information, you're basing things on how people perceive themselves and otherwise, you have to rely on an untrusty sort of like world builder and an untrusty witness to gauge on whether this person is someone we'd want to allow back, or do we even believe what they're saying? I don't know. And I think that's something where it exposes the inherent flaws with the system, and how even when you're trying to do your best within it, there's going to be compromises or consequences that are kind of out spiraling. And on top of that, of course, the fact that the queue is building faster than it can be processed. So lots of inherent problems that are being well explored on that side. Whereas the wet side, it's not nearly the same in terms of what stakes we're talking about, because we're not doing that type of story, at least not yet, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, well, the audience will find out more about the stakes and the morality stuff going on in Wet Team soon. Though what they've just heard was the crab arc, which was relatively simple. No one was that fleshed out because I was trying to, like with Dumas, it was more about giving a platform for the characters to establish their personalities. But yeah, what I'm thinking of is the Riddle Snake arc is really going to open up soon because there's going to be some big choices. So yeah, the audience.
Absolutely.
The audience just heard the Well of Resurrection, opens up right before the battle with the Medusa, and let's just say that goes some places. So I'm excited about it.
It sure does. What I find interesting is that your original idea, I think, way back for season 9 was this more of a Western theme, and then things got modified. So this is almost like a retread on that concept, but with obviously a wet twist, as it were.
Sure, there's different like eras of the Western, and there's different modes of the Western. We don't need to necessarily go down the rabbit hole here, but there's like the traditional Western, the revisionist Western, the anti-Western. There's like all of these. There's mostly film traditions, but also in novels and so forth. So even things that look pretty similar on their face can have like radically different themes.
Mm-hmm. I think, kind of on the other element there, one thing I find fascinating on the Wet Team side is that you have like not necessarily in the same degrees of divergence, but you have different opinions on the nature of resurrection, the Riddlesnake, and otherwise between Barbella, Reaper, and Boyce. That does get explored, I think, and it kind of shows an added intrigue from the fact that the people above have a very different idea of how the whole process works and how they view it. And then people underwater, because of, well, as we established, we can tangibly see the effects of the Riddlesnake and stuff and how it operates. So for us, it's almost like, could you be an atheist about the Riddlesnake? That doesn't make any sense. It's real. You can see it, like you could say, I don't agree with it. I did not agree to its newsletter that has been sending me, but you can't say I don't believe in it, that I don't believe that it exists. And I think that's a very fun element of like one half feeling almost more clinical and more mysterious, and the other side feeling more pragmatic and real in some ways.
That's something about like Dungeons and Dragons in general, is that how real the gods are and how like psychologically people deal with that, because it doesn't really make sense to import like our world's concept of atheism one-to-one when people like very visibly get magic powers from gods. But yeah, even the different approaches in the same world, like I think you're gonna see a lot of this arc, because like Reaper doesn't like enjoy riddles or respect riddles, but it's not like she rejects the big obvious big fish snake eel. Right. Like it's there clearly.
I mean, if she didn't believe that the real snake was real, what is she doing here when she's trying to get her master back to kill him? Right? Like you can't. So it's like I'm not a follower of the church, but I know that this thing is real. I'm going to play along so I can get what I need,
Yeah. It's funny because I think in an earlier idea of this season, there was like the vibe checks for Dry Team, and like the Wet Team was mostly a whole patrol stuff. And it wasn't until I kind of thought it would be too repetitive to keep doing the snake arc basically over and over again that I diversified it more. So this is the arc, the one we're in currently, that is really the religion heavy. It's like dealing with the church. It's not that it's going to go away after this, but that's just the focus of this one. But there was another version of it of this season where that was more directly parallel between the two processes, because Dry Team does have like a pattern. Like we do the vibe check, we deal with the consequences, but with Wet Team I'm having you do all kinds of different Western posse stuff.
It's the difference between a campaign where each arc takes place in a fantastical different world of someone's mind primarily, and the consequences of that, versus another that is focused on a fairly small community trying to grow out and trying to defend itself against just the world around it in various ways, because we're just kind of out here by ourselves. And as we established, there's other communities that are not necessarily going to just like leave us alone. They're going to impose themselves on us for one reason or another. And how do we deal with that in some capacity?
Definitely. We can move to the next question, sponsored by Squishy Fishy. Tara is giving money to say hi to all the cats. Thank you very much. And a werewolf couldn't come up with the username this month, which is, how are you finding the player-to-player downtime scene? So we literally just recorded our third one last night. So we have a big enough sample size to have more formed opinions about this kind of gimmick. It's going to be at least a couple seasons before we do any downtimes like this again, obviously, because we're kind of a single DM for 12. So what do you think of the experiment?
I think it's a really interesting one because one, you know, I never had a chance to interact with Leon in season 10 at all. There was never an opportunity for that. And I was like, it was not like a missed opportunity in the grand scheme of things there, but it allows for that sort of like cross player to player interactions that, you know, you wouldn't get otherwise. Some people lament about how we get less time with NPCs through it there, but that's just kind of the weight of it, right? It is like you're either going to be giving players times with NPCs, which is very DM heavy, or in this case here, we get player-to-player interactions. We can have the different worldviews and the different ideologies more cleanly defined, because I think during the second downtime, there's like more clean opportunities for Boyce to voice opinions about just the nature of the whole vibe check resurrection process. Something that wouldn't have happened if there wasn't an interaction with somebody from the dry team, right?
Yeah, I think it helps that there's a core like ethical conflict to discuss. There's like stuff going on there. I think there are previous seasons where maybe there wouldn't have been that much to talk about, because it's like, do you want to defeat the bad guy? Yeah, I sure do want to defeat the bad guy. Off the top of my head, Wormwood was one where it had a kind of more simplistic, and that's not necessarily good or bad. It's just a different approach where there was like clearly a bad guy we had to take down, and so there's only so many scenes where you can all look at each other in the eye and say, we got to get that bad guy.
Yeah, I think it's also interesting because each season presents a different opportunity for what downtime scenes mean. Because like I said, Wormwood had its own sort of style. Grendel had a very clear, like, you have to choose relationships between people in the village. You have to earn like trust ranks as you go along the season. Season 9 is weird because I was there for Dragon Quest did not have a downtime, and we were just like one arc effectively that was pretty long, and then Train was just part of the group for the last thing there. And then season 10, when we had the dual DMing sort of system there, the way the downtimes work were really ways of exploring the relationships between the characters, the Rezubian, and NPCs related to those characters. And so this one just being another opportunity to experiment with how do downtimes work in a dual DM situation. And because I think this season is really, a lot of it is about ideas, beliefs, and wants, having a space for those to be discussed between these characters as they have their own independent arcs, I think is a really strong opportunity for some philosophical exploration.
I think we got lucky that it works for this team composition. Looking to the future, the next Double DM season currently is Pumpkin Season, Season 13. And I think the premise as of this recording is essentially that the Kingdom of Courage and the Kingdom of Fear are going to be like rivals or enemies in some way. And so it won't make sense. And I don't think we'll have the player-to-player crossover downtimes. So like, you know, we may do this again if it makes sense to do so. But this, in hindsight, it was like, oh, this was like the perfect opportunity, and it was the only opportunity for maybe a couple years in each direction, which is, you know, I didn't even think of it like that.
Yeah. One example is even in the first downtime between Boyce and Lillian, just the fact that I could have Boyce just posit the fact that, hey, Lillian, you have a friend that you brought back. I have a friend who doesn't want to come back, who isn't back and will never come back. They told me explicitly, don't bring me back. That's like an interesting fact to throw out there. And seeing like Lillian sort of like take that and be like, huh, I didn't realize someone would actually have that mentality. That's sort of like, again, that's an opportunity you would not have in most other seasons we've run. So I think it was actually, like you said, an accidental stroke of brilliance that we happened to fall into this format with this composition of players and settings.
Sometimes it happens like that. To move to the next question, sponsored by Chase Sterling, Cult of Aurora, and Dr. Goatman. With the less focus on the NPCs and the downtime, it's been harder to get some face time, but been your favorite NPC so far? I know we haven't met all of them, but there's been some silly people, wet and dry.
There have been, gosh, like the tough part is that in terms of the NPCs on like wet side, some of the ones I really like have not been introduced yet to the audience, so I can't really say. So it's definitely later in wet arc, so I'm going to be abstaining from that. On dry side, Quinn just throws so many fucking characters so well because as you noted or as she noted, a bunch of them are like other former player character ideas that were just sort of scrapped and now being recycled into that there. But like I will say that the characters that are introduced in this specific art and wet are really, really fun. This is actually a really good bunch of NPCs we're going to be running into, and I like a lot of them for what they represent. And I mean, for me, the NPC I like is just the town of Zalphos. I just like the vibes of the town itself and how it feels like this weird mishmash of different things. When you threw out like the school as like the government, love it. That's just like peak, like up my alley type of humor. And the K-parts were also just very fun. Like I think the K-part family, like, they could have. I remember one person like in the Discord commenting how the K-parts like were engaging in like blood, like war criminal tier sort of trade. I'm just like, you can say that for one lens, but for the way that Boyce and others are looking at it, it's like, no, that's not what they are going to view them as. They again, it kind of plays into my earlier comment. Like you can look at it as quote unquote an outsider and interpret through that lens, but as a local is a different vibe altogether. And the K parts were definitely very fun. And the moment that Quinn had Reaper just like turn her back and walk away from the family, it's just like, oh no, this is such a great setup for this set of NPCs. So I do like the K-part family as well. That's been a very fun group to see, and you will be seeing them again, folks, in the audience. So
I didn't know how much we would get into them or like how, beloved they would be. I will say I look to the future. They become a surprisingly important emotional component. But it could have gone a couple different ways, right? Like I think the core, it's full spoilers, people know, the crime that some of the family members are committing against the other could have just been like, too far. It'd be like, oh, these people need to be, killed or imprisoned or something. But by letting it go, it's just like opens up so much possibility for making up for things, for reconciliation. And I don't know, I'm from the South, so I feel like I can play a little bit in the space of the big fucked up Southern family.
Sure.
If you were a New Englander, maybe it would be cool for you to play in my backyard there. But I know these people. I've seen some fucked up shit where someone's trying to steal your Social Security check or whatever.
It also gives me like some fun echoes of season 3, because I remember season 3, the way that opened up, where it's like, hey, your job is to go arrest this person, and me playing as like the big paladin cop Roland goes in there, is just like, no, we're not going to arrest this person, just leaves. And that character ended up being pretty pivotal down the line in the story as well. So I think that's also one of those things where, from a player, like, killing or removing an NPC is kind of a weighty choice, because in many cases it means you're removing that character's ability to be something in the story down the line. That's probably one of the biggest reasons why I'm hesitant to kill people unless there is like a strong narrative or emotional reason in the moment to say, yeah, there's no other way I could do this, right?
Yeah, especially in the more narrative podcast we do, where anyone you kill could just be like, oh, they could have went a different direction. That could have turned out to be a beloved face turn. You never know.
I think back to season 2, where you introduced the Drider, Gwendolyn, I think it was, and I just kill her on the spot immediately.
Yeah, I mean, I did that when there was Zubian, where Wendy blew off that military guy's head, and it's like,
oh my god!
I sure hope there weren't other plans for him, because he's toast now. But I just felt like I had to.
No, and that's kind of that's the rub, right? Like sometimes it's just a character choice to be like, no, like this character in this situation would not allow this to go by. But that's kind of the dynamics of what type of character is it? What is their relationship to the world? And I think in both of those cases, you can think of like Wendy's relationship to that person and Elias's relationship with the Drider. They're basically outsiders. They don't have the same type of relationship with the community as one might expect. And you have this sort of like, I need to protect my friend, or I need to protect these bullywogs, and that's sort of the attitude you come into that leads to those choices. So it's a fun thing to think about. But like I said, I don't regret our choice to do what we did with the Capehart family. I think it was the right choice in character, and narratively is allowed for much better payoffs than if we had just like arrested them or killed them off or whatever else, you know.
I agree. Yeah, I've been trying to commit to some bold choices. You know, people just heard Hialeah cut a deal with President Slater. I'm thankful and surprised that everyone seems to be on board with where I'm going, and no one's like rushing to judgment. Sometimes, you'll do something and everyone's like, "This is stupid. You're an asshole," and it's like, "No, please trust me. I have some ideas." But the response to this has been pretty good so far.
I like how you even remarked about how like you were not expecting Hialeah to be the type of personality she was until like the first downtime. You're like, wow, she's kind of a jerk, It's just like
I'll get more into that when someone interviews me. But yeah, I found her to be a much more cynical person than I assumed she would be. Just because I got in the brain space, it happens sometimes. The character takes you away. Let's move to the next question, sponsored by Dust in Dark Water, Egon Steiner, and Francois V. A deleted scene in Everything Everywhere All at Once. I would watch that. Speaking of Slater, he's building a series of trains, train tracks. The implications for the Dice Funk universe are staggering. Laura was immediately in the chat when she heard the drink cut of that and be like, trains are coming to Dice Funk.
Don't you take this away from me, Yorsky,
What do you think about the kind of building lore implications for future seasons? Because, every season is self-contained, theoretically. That's my hope, is that you can start anywhere. But we are doing things that have repercussions and reverberations. This whole thing obviously comes from season 9, especially now that we've blown up original D&D, essentially. Like, my intention was to pull apart Forgotten Realms, like, limb by limb. And we did that. We've succeeded, and now we have to live with what we've done. So are you walking around as your character being like, oh man, I can't step on any butterflies, or season 67 is going to be weird?
I don't really think about it in those sort of terms. I mean, I do think of like, if my character does something, does that give implications or possibilities for how future seasons can be set up? Sure. I'm not gunning for them, and I'm not running away from them either. I sort of look at it from, this is the lens I sort of take on from it. When I first decided to do Shard Point way back when, I didn't have to tie it to the Dice Funk canon, but I did, but I wanted to do it in a way that allowed it to be very self-contained, like you said. And so I just mainly latched onto the premise that the gods are dead. That's what the principal framing device is. And someone could come in and be like, okay, how do they die? If you really need to know, check out season 3 of Dice Funk. But you don't need to know why they died, because it's not important to know that to understand the stories being told here. And that's sort of the metric I go by when it comes to things being self-contained. The most that this kind of played into my attempts to design a character was honestly season 10, because I did not want to make any assumptions about what the state of the astral plane, the far realms and stuff was relative to seasons 5 and 6. So I was very non-committal on details. Like people say, oh, Skitch, where did Max come from? I'm not going to say, because I don't think it's important to really establish that during the season. And, there's speculations on what it could be, but like, that's kind of like that balancing act of like, and that's also kind of like in some respect why, there might be opportunities for talk about like, where did Boyce come from? That's not important to know. Boyce is here. The story is about Boyce, where he is now, not where he came from. It's sort of the way I think about it. And even the same thing with Aze. Like, Aze came from some community out in the world, but the story is about him in Grendel. So that's how I compartmentalize those elements when it comes to my character designs. And I think as long as that's possible for me, I think that it's possible also for the audience to be able to not have to feel like they have to listen to specific seasons to understand the scope of the story being told.
That makes sense. I was thinking about season 10 recently because, yeah, my original idea, for, spoilers for that season, it was that just this was a crew of a ship who gets stranded in space when the other apocalypse previously established happened, and they're just cut off and they're out in space. But the way the season ended up wrapping up, completely outside of my prediction, was everyone built a time machine, and so now like all bets are off, everything's on the table as far as the that timeline. I guess that is what Star Trek did, so it's not like there's no precedent for that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But so yeah, this season so far, I mean, who knows what will be referenced later, but it seems like the proliferation of train technology will be a big one, and in the first wet arc, discussing another sea. Like basically, if Banyan is in the Pacific, the Atlantic is alive, and that is very exciting. I'm just telling you, I intend to revisit that.
Yeah, and that's definitely gonna be fun to see. Like, I make no like predictions about like what future seasons might entail, because I don't want to get too, like, I've had my run of like very specific across season sort of storytelling. And basically seasons 2 through 4 was a particular arc that I ran through for a particular family line. And there's other things that are kind of set up, but like I'm not necessarily planning on like, let's say if season 15 is another space one, am I going to gun for like a descendant or something related to Max Ina in there as a thing? Probably not, but I'm not opposed to, let's say, Ardwing being just something that's in there, and like, well, what is Ardwing? Well, we didn't explore it too deeply in season 10, but it's just an Ardling space force. Done, right? Like it's easy enough to wave that away and not have to worry about getting caught in the weeds about like, oh, how's this connect to everything else? But I'm curious about this other C idea you have, Austin. So I'm just kind of like, I can almost hear you like rubbing your hands like, I got this idea. I'm going to fuck everyone up over it,
It'll definitely be a couple years before we get back there. I don't want to do two C settings. C settings is interesting to say. Right back to back to back, that'll be too much. But I was intrigued immediately by it, and there's many water tropes that you can't accomplish deep down where we are. When we get closer to the surface, something a little piratey-er. We're definitely going to get back to. But I think season 11 will be the last for the foreseeable future of a kind of pioneering spirit where it's like people arriving in a place. That was, season 9 as well. And season 8, to an extent, people like fleeing the apocalypse and so forth. My just looking forward at this point, season 12, Dragon season, those people are going to have been there for a while. Characters will just be from where they are. They'll have history. Season 13 as well. Strangers already, I don't know if this has been said out loud explicitly, but everyone knows Strangers from Pumpkin World, right? Like that's okay. I feel like that's obvious.
You gave Dan the opportunity to do that, and Dan is running with it and probably stressing himself out even more by just like all the planning he's doing for that. Like, it's like, if people just make sure people understand, every time an episode is recorded that Dan is involved with, there's usually like an extra hour of like planning for the next session, ideas of ways to sort of like deal with the problem and such at hand. And sometimes really out there ways of just sort of like, is there a way we could circumvent this fight with this little trick here or otherwise? That's the type of brain that Dan has, which makes him very fun to be around. But also I'm just like, oh man, I don't know what it's going to be like being around a season where he's DMing, how that's going to feel like with all the work he's building up for it there.
Yeah, Dan and I talked about that a lot, but he has a very detail-oriented approach, which is very good and very interesting. But like with Stranger, it's like Stranger's from a place, he's invested in the place, and it's important, and it gives you just a grounding and a context for all your actions. Where in a lot of D&D, you're just like, yeah, my guy's name is Morpho, the warrior. His family is dead, so he's on a quest for revenge. And it's like, it doesn't, there's no materialism to that. There's no place, there's no culture to it. And it's not like you can't, not everything needs to be like a Marxist analysis of medieval, peasantry or whatever. But I do like grounding a character in a place and time. And I think, from season 12 forward, everyone will be where they're from, if that makes sense. Like they'll have that, context, which I think is good for character building.
And I think it also allows, like you said, for more opportunities for world building, where you can have characters establish people they know. What do they do within the context of the community? What are their attitude about the culture they've grown up in and stuff? Those are all opportunities that are easier to play into when you're not doing like a pioneering, people are coming from somewhere else and then trying to make their way in a new world.
Yeah. We hand wave a lot, but it's funny because if you think about the actual like corollary medieval experience, like people's family name was so important. It's like your letter of introduction. It's like whether you could get access to resources and social connections. Like just being a stranger is like on the same level of being like a leper or a criminal. Like it.
Yeah, like that name choice is so good. Because it just sounds cool, but also, like you said, yeah, it's almost like a rebuttal of traditional naming conventions. We look at European, British naming conventions where so many names are based on who you're related to or what your job in society is, right?
Yeah, I'm definitely thinking from a British medieval perspective, but even like in the Japanese media, that I'm familiar with, it's like an armed outsider in your community is like a genuine object of fear. It's like they're not gonna be shaking hands with the Duke or whatever. Like people are gonna try to run them out of town because they're who knows what they're capable of. There's no consequences in a world like pre. Like tracking, they could be anyone and they could be up to anything. It's like, anyway, this is like a tangent, but the way a lot of D&D campaigns go, the term is murder hobo, just going from place to place doing violence. That's like a scary concept, and we often have much friendlier situations. But I am excited to get to a place where people will have reputations and family and connections and stuff like that. So.
The other area that I find interesting to think about is for me, what I spend a lot of time operating in is on the relationship between the rules of a game and the narratives that are formed from it. And I think part of the reason why murder hobos was a thing that kind of came about was because when you look at older D&D editions and how leveling and gaining progress works, in the earliest editions, a lot of your experience was built around how much treasure you accrued from dungeons, right? So your goal was to kick down the door, kill people, take treasure, and you level up from that. And then in second edition D&D, you had a lot of formative rules that instructed you the best way to do things to gain experience. The two interesting rules from that I remember being like, rogues getting extra experience based on stuff they stole. But of course, the most batshit insane rule was for Sylvan Elves, which had a rule in there. And this is, I don't know if I told you this before, Austin. Sylvan Elves in second edition D&D in the Book of Elves had a rule that stated that if they acted on friendly terms with anyone they did not know for long enough, meaning someone they had not known for someone they have known for less than 5 years, they should be deducted experience points for bad role playing.
Gary Gygax is such a psycho.
No, that was not Gygax, though. That was second edition. That was a different.
Oh no, the madness is spreading.
That was the edition of D&D explicitly built to cut out Gygax and Arneson from getting money from D&D. That's why it was built effectively. And then third edition, depending on the rules you're reading, had a lot of more performative rules about like the Kender. There's a lot of rules about how the Kender worked in third edition, and that iteration of it where it basically expressed that like if you're playing a Kender, you should be stealing from your allies in your party and then lying about it, because basically you borrow quote unquote stuff casually, since Kenders have no sense of property. They don't care about property. Everything's just everyone's to share. So like there's rules and stuff like that. So when you have rules about how characters should behave, and those rules are tied to rewards and progress, then you get someone in there who's like, okay, I want to win at the game. I'm going to play by the rules that encourage me to be a murder hobo. So our approach, by making our leveling based on milestones, not experience, and other factors, means so you don't feel compelled to just like kill someone on sight, because you don't need to do that to advance the game, to advance your character. The only thing you have to do is complain to the DM about, can I reach level 15 so I can do my cool stuff? And they're like, we don't have enough episodes in the campaign for that, Dan. Sorry.
It should be fairly obvious, like with modern game design philosophy, but when you prescribe roleplay to that degree, you are actually taking away roleplay, because then there is a correct thing to do and it might as well be a computer doing it, you know?
There was a mentality in earlier editions of D&D, and I think is mostly embodied in first and second, especially in second, when you rolled your stats first, because I know some folks who vocalized it better than I, but the mentality was you would roll your stats first, and then you looked at them and you're like, how do I make these stats work as a character? And then you pick your character class and stuff like that, and you're trying to maximize that efficacy, and then you're imposed a character role based on that, and now you have to kind of put on this character mask and play it. But modern player conventions, like you alluded to, because of what we see in real play shows, what people are taking in from media they watch and stuff, is they get an idea for a character first and come to the table with it. And games and rule systems that allow you to bring in your character idea and then build from that, I think, are easier to get onto, and I think just easier for people to role play what they want and not feel like I'm doing this wrong because I'm not getting the most experience points based on my role play behavior here.
Yeah, it's like going back to an old arcade game like Asteroids or something, where it's like the plot, there's no plot, right? I'm just here to get points. I want the highest points. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, I can see myself sitting down and playing a character at the table, make it work, stab everything that moves and get their treasure. It's so funny how treasure was such a big thing when we don't even track money. It's just assumed that everyone has the fucking greed mind virus.
It's funny, like Daggerheart, the Critical Role game that's being developed, they don't even track money explicitly. They describe money like as handfuls of gold and stuff like that, which is hilarious. I understand what you're saying, though. Like, we all are aspiring for Asteroids to get their act together and make Asteroids the line and make it a self-reflective story about who you are out there blowing these things up, you know?
Oh, man, that'd be good.
Do you even know why you came here in the first place?
The loading screens are like, those asteroids had a family, you sick fuck. Fuck. Didn't Spec Ops: The Line get taken down from digital distribution?
I think it's actually back now. Let me double check here real quick.
That's terrifying. I think people need to play that, even if you don't think it aged that well, because I think, there's a fair argument that it's like, kind of a proto or, a embryonic form of self-reflexive video game criticism for, the gleeful violence or whatever. It still feels historically important. We can't lose that.
I'll have to double check there. I think there might be a path for it to get back, but yeah, like traditional digital distribution, it's gone. There's a chance it might come back at some point there, but that's the implications of like the fragility of media like that is a big thing I've been thinking a lot about. It actually plays a lot into things I think about in terms of like how ideas are formed, retained, and lost, and how things are fleeting and stuff like that. And it's actually something that I've been planning on for my own sort of designs for the future here. So. Talk about that sometime later on. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask you a question about the future. Maybe now's the time. We can do a question sponsored by I upped my donation so Austin can have a family, and you should too. Thank you very much. Midlife Stasis, Conduit of Inevitability, and Miles and Danny love Dice Funk forever. The question is, do you have anything you want to tease about the future? We're always working on one-shots. We've announced a couple of seasons. Do you have any other projects? Like, what can we look forward to anything you want to kind of get people hyped about?
I mean, do you want me to just say it? I'll just say it,
It's up to you. If I had a PR person who knew the correct thing, I wouldn't ask you the question. They would formulate. They would draft it for me.
So I'm gonna spill the beans here. I'm not a player in season 12 as much as I'd like to be based on what the season takes place in and everything else there. So I'm not gonna be a player for it, and it is a single DM season. So I'm not gonna be DMing like a separate team, related to what season 12 is doing. What we're doing is a bit of a different project. Austin obviously knows about this. We are planning on doing a lot more shard point, like, and not just one shots, hopefully, depending on what we can organize. We're still in the planning phases for it, but yeah, that's going to be coming back, and there's going to be a bit to it. I actually have like a larger meta theme for that going in there that should be fun. But yeah, that's the main plans right now, and I'm scrambling to find people to be in there. So listeners out there, if there's someone that you think would be a good fit for it that has not been on Sharp before, my DMs are open for you to send threats to make me do it. No, I mean, just forward information around and spread the word to people that you would think would be kind of fun fits for the show, because not only does this allow us to kind of reach out to larger audiences, but much like a lot of other things, I want to use it as a means of bringing in outside people to the show and then kind of show off how cool they are. That's kind of the big goal when you're doing something like my big goal with it is not necessarily to run the same types of stories with stakes that you and Quinn and Laura are so good at doing. I want to do it like it's a showpiece for the guests, and that's the main goal for right now there. So yeah, that is the current plans right now is more shard point coming later this year, I guess, basically. Yeah,
it's hard to say exactly, but there definitely will be more, and it'll be in a slightly different format. We're hammering out the details, but also hopefully when you reach out and suggest someone to be on the show, it's someone you know and have a connection to and can bully. Because if you just send us a DM like get Timothy Chalamet, it's like that's not particularly helpful. You know,
I have a few people I can bully, and I'm trying to bully them appropriately. The funniest thing is asking someone, hey, are you interested in playing like in a one shot or like a 3-episode thing? They're like, oh, I'm kind of busy. I'm like, you don't understand. We're talking about like 5-6 months from now, and we can work a schedule around you to make it work. Would you like to be a guest on a podcast for a few episodes where you get to show off being cool and funny? And make me look like an idiot, that's the pitch to you, But
people always want to have done creative work. Everyone wants to have written a book, but no one wants to sit down and write it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so, people definitely watch Critical Role or Adventure Zone or whatever, and they're like, "Oh, I would love to do that." And it's like, "Okay, we'll do it." And it's like, I gotta wash my dog."
I was like, when would we be recording? Middle of August. I'll be washing my dog. Then I'm sorry. What?
It's a fucking miracle that this show exists the way it has, that we have gotten all these neurodivergent adults to have anything resembling a normal schedule. I mean, frankly, behind the scenes, we've been skipping more and more episodes, frankly, since moving to the double DM format, because now we psychologically can do that, I guess. But I mean,
I prefer this over what we went through during some of those seasons. I think season 8 was one of the worst ones when it came to like, oh my God, we got to record sometime this week, and we got all these schedules not cooperating. We just got to meet up on a Friday fucking night and do this,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't want to go back there, definitely, which is why
No.
Even on the single DM seasons like season 12, we are going to still be recording other stuff.
It also allows you to be a little gremlin as a player too, Austin. You can admit to that too.
I do enjoy being a player. Yeah, I mean,
I'll tell you this, folks. This you're gonna forget this by the time it's relevant. But I've seen one of Austin's character ideas, and I immediately love it. I've not even read the character sheet. I just read the premise. I'm just like, I'm on board. Let's do this.
Some people have a soul full of characters. Quinn and I both have this disease, very obviously, where it's like, hey, you want to be in my show? And it's like, yeah, my guy's called Spizzle Spozzle. He's a 5th generation knight. He has 2 left legs. I don't know, just whatever the fuck.
It was one of those things where, like, me being much slower at developing characters, I don't view as a flaw, but it's a different personality trait, because I will doubt every choice I make for like hours or weeks or months. So settling in on a character could take a lot longer. So it's fun kind of being around people who are so fast at making characters that can kind of nudge me along. I can say that for a future season, I do have a pretty solid character idea already pretty quickly, which I'm happy about because it gives me time to develop it out.
Well, yeah, the gears are moving, and there's wheels within wheels for future seasons. People are pitching me. There's season 20 characters and shit. So I mean, there's at a certain point we are just mentally ill, and we don't have to actually follow through on half the stuff. But I just like talking about fucking elves with my friends, so it's fine.
Yeah. And for me, like, the other thing I'll point out about Shard Point is there a possibility that we might play something that's not D&D 5th edition? Maybe. We have the opportunity for it because when we're not trying to, like, there's opportunities for it. It really comes down to who the players are and what they're comfortable with. But here's the difference between you and me. Like, you're constantly thinking about characters. I'm thinking about game mechanics and rule sets from scratch over and over again. Whenever I see a person struggling with a character idea or something, I'm like, I'll just hand write you a new subclass from scratch. I'll just do that. I actually had to do that twice in a week during Resubian at one point, where Laura's like, here's what's going to happen. So I wrote 2 separate subclasses to choose from for her to choose between for one of my characters in a span of a week. That's my brain disease in that case.
Sure. Yeah. I have no loyalty to Wizards of the Coast as a corporation. Hasbro can choke on it for all I care. So yeah, we might play something else someday. It really just comes down to the players and their preferences and idiosyncrasies. I recorded a Call of Cthulhu one shot somewhere recently. I don't know where or when that's going to go up, but yeah, I don't really care about systems that much, or I care about them insofar as they advance characters. If I had a button I could push to give everyone my brain issues, we would play Dogs in the Vineyard or something. I don't know, for all I care.
Yeah, and for me, it'd be like something like Fabula Ultima or Icon or Break, which I'm going to be getting a copy of. Or if I was reading a real Gremlin, I have not even read the rules. So hey, let's play the Final Fantasy 14 TTRPG. I have it pre-ordered already. Or I already ordered the Shin Megami Tensei one. Did you order yours yet?
No, I didn't. I did see it, though. We talked about it.
I already pre-ordered it. The day you showed me it, I ordered it immediately. Because that's so funny. That's my brain disease in action.
I do love it. I worry about just recreating other series and stuff so closely. That's why one of the worlds I love very much is Mass Effect. But I don't know if I'd want to play a Mass Effect RPG just because I feel like I'd be I don't know, playing with someone else's toys or something, if that makes sense.
It's a limitation of certain games. Like one game system I'm pretty fond of, which is you ever seen the TV show Leverage?
A little bit. We talked about it for season 4.
Yes, there is a TTRPG that was made for it by Margaret Weiss, and it's a really fun rule set for the show. But whenever I ask people if they wanted to play it, they're like, no, because I just want to play the characters from the show. I wouldn't want to make my own character, and that's a limitation when you're trying to recreate a specific setting. Also, I have a hard copy of the book. It's not sold anywhere anymore. You can't even buy the PDF. Copies of that book go for $200+, So I found it at my local game shop over a decade ago for $30. I'm just I'm not getting rid of this ever. I will just purge ideas from it. If you want to play Leverage the game, just go play Blades in the Dark or something, That's pretty much the successor for it.
If we were going to do another world or something, it'd probably Star Wars would be one of the easier ones, just because the fucking universe is so big and there's so many different time periods. You could just set it really far away from canon stuff and then play with lightsabers and it'd be fine.
I actually had done a Star Wars campaign with my friend Fornea years ago, and actually with other Shardpoint alumni, including Mecha GM and Nick Freeman, Y Ruler, Nick of Time. We were doing it with the Feng Shui action movie system as opposed to the Star Wars rule set, because we were trying to play it more like a action film design. It was fine. It was fun. It worked,
Also, people talk about superhero TTRPGs, where it's even if you want to be original, what the rules really support is, do you want to be Batman or Superman or the existing characters?
You have point buy based systems, like certain versions of Mutants and Masterminds and Champions. I've played both of those. Those games offer a lot of leverage to make characters. The first character I made was an actor with an indestructible motorcycle who was part of a superhero team because he was just method acting research for an upcoming superhero film. It's just like it's just a dumb character idea there. But the rules allow you to basically invent powers for it. The downside is you basically either need a standalone application to do all the math for the point buy system, or better yet, someone who knows the game and can tell you what to do optimally to build your character. And that's just that's the burden of like a classless and open rule system, like a GURPS like type of system.
A lot of information in this one today. This
is what you get when you have me around. You get me any close to like rule systems and mechanics talk. I love talking about it because it's I guess it's the teacher in me. It play like, how do games work? How do people learn games and stuff? And I always find that neat to think about.
A detail-rich interview. Let's bring it home, though. Last question, sponsored by the Space Fighters. Can't wait for Austin Dad evolution. And you poor unfortunate rolls, you botch, you crit. That's great. This is a question I think I'm going to ask pretty much everybody when we talk about their characters, at least until we bring back conduits. But if Boyce had a conduit, what would it be? And you can't just say architecture. I know you want to. Come on.
Yeah, so... there's sort of two angles I could have for that there. One could be creation. That's a kind of an easy angle, like, building things and stuff like that. But you could also like the conduit. I like to think of like the idea of schematics, the idea of not architecture per se, but being able to perceive the inner workings of the area around them. So it's almost like you could apply it to looking at someone and seeing how like their circulatory system is operating at times and be able to extract how it works, kind of almost like a Sherlock Holmes-esque thing in that respect. Or when so like something about being able to look at a system of sorts and then break it down to how does it move and how does it work.
It's funny because that was the power set. That's explicitly the abilities of Dovin Bond, a character from Magic the Gathering, who they realized they didn't know how to write for, and so they killed him off.
Isn't that a great thing as a writer? If you're like, oh man, I wrote this cool character, I don't know how to write him. Oops. Just kill him. Oops.
The classic Stephen King The Stand situation. One of my favorite writing stories is he's like, oh, I have too many dudes. A bomb goes off, they all die. Don't worry about it.
That made me think about like, okay, well, what sort of Magic the Gathering like color combination would Boyce be? And it's like, I'm kind of bouncing around as if I forget the one I think would be more appropriate for him. It feels kind of like Azorius plus kind of thing, right? Like blue, white plus green, maybe I think would be appropriate for him, right?
Yeah, Bant.
Yep. Yeah. I think Bant is a good fit for Boyce in particular. And like that's the other way I like that. I honestly, Magic Color Identities, I actually loved it a lot when you did that analysis of characters for the first few seasons. And for me, that is a lot more fun to play into than Conduit necessarily when it comes to describing someone. I think it's unintentionally so cool narratively that Richard Garfield could have never anticipated it when designing Magic the Gathering, how cool the color pie and the interaction between the color are when it comes to thinking about a character's general temperament about the world. And I think it's really super cool about that. And
I'll need to ask more players that when they come on here, because it's like, okay, Stranger, I'm pretty sure is classic Golgari, Nature and Death, the cycle. That makes sense a lot. Lillian has the creativity of red. What other, it's funny for a Dryad to be red, right? They're so green normally, but in fact, what we've seen of Lillian is like interfering in nature with the bovines, which is anti-green. That's just, it's fascinating. I'm thinking Hylia seems Jeskai? She wants the church order, which is white. She's a writer, creativity red, and then blue. She's a nerd and wants to know everything. So
right. I could almost view like Barbella as kind of a Boros type of thing there, right? To a certain degree.
Yeah, like church plus punch.
Yeah, exactly. and I think it's like I said, it's a cool alternate way that kind of it reminds me of the constellation concepts from season 8, right? It's a set of puzzle pieces you attach together and assign meaning into it. Whereas with an open question like conduits, I've mentioned this before, if I design a character, I can't come up with a conduit for them. When I play them, I can then assign a conduit to them because I can figure out like who are they in the face of the world, and then I can assign that to them.
Fascinating. I'm really glad we did this. We went a little longer than usual. Just had so much to talk about. We could have went more. Game systems alone could have been a separate episode, but you and I have always, just lost the hours when we get on the microphone. All of our D&D book reviews is 7 hours a piece. You know how it is.
Yeah, one of these days we'll review something that's not D&D, and all of a sudden it'll be like, oh shit, we're at 4 hours. Anyways.
Yeah. Well, we probably should do more of those. There's a lot of books out there, but time's getting away. But I'm gonna go see Quinn. I've been saying that on Speedpunk. People know I'm about to get on a plane and go to Pennsylvania, and then in a couple hours. So that's where I'm going.
Right. We'll have fun with that, and nice talking to you as always.
Yeah, a lot of fun. Anything you want to say on the way out? Everyone knows your links and so forth should be in the description.
Everything should be in the description otherwise. And if, like I said, please, if you have ideas of people that you think would be a fun fit for Shardpoint, just run them my way, or even just throw the question out to them. I might have to come up with like a formal ad copy, like here's the form email you send to people to petition for Shardpoint. I have to kind of feel like this is not a scam, this is not a fishing expedition or something. I'm not trying to steal people's blood. I just want them to be on a show where they can be funny and cool,
Or you just put them in your trunk, just drop them off in my house. It's fine either way.
I listen. I can't do that anymore.
Not after last time.
Not after the incident. No.
Okay.